Things have gotten serious in the Western Caribbean in a hurry, as Hurricane Sara is likely to form in the next few days. We'll talk about where it could be going and the potential significant impacts. Your forecast across the Caribbean and the Bahamas starts right now.
This is Meteo Mundo.
Hi friends, Rusty back here at Meteo Mundo. We're your home for Caribbean weather, and it's nice to see you on a Tuesday. Coming up in this video, we are going to deep dive into our tropical wave, which is now an invest and a very high likelihood of quickly developing into a hurricane as we get towards the end of the week, potentially even a major hurricane. This is a serious situation. We're going to deep dive into that, obviously talk about where it could be headed and the impacts, and of course the rest of the Caribbean and the Bahamas forecast as well. Now, normally with a developing system like this, I would highlight what's been happening today. We would get into the forecast and what's been happening across the rest of our region and then get back into the potential forecast of this developing storm. But this storm, and if you can kind of read my tone, is a very serious situation. We're going to go ahead and go chronologically from beginning to end. I've been spending a lot of time today looking at all the different models, all the different solutions, how this could evolve. And so I think it warrants us just taking this step by step all the way through what I know on this Tuesday. Then we'll get to what's happening across the rest of our area and look at the forecasts for everyone. But let's talk about what's been happening. Again, we do have an invest now. This is brand new for the National Hurricane Center on this Tuesday afternoon. Invest 99L, so no longer just a tropical wave, an area of invest. Notice that this development zone is red. It's up to a 90% chance of development. Friends, the Hurricane Center knows, and they've quickly ramped up that chance. We're going to get ourselves a depression or a tropical storm to develop very quickly. And some of the models are already making this a hurricane by Friday. So quick, rapid intensification in the Western Caribbean is likely. Now that we have an invest, we'll start to get our high resolution tropical models beginning to run. So we're gonna get a lot more data to look at here in the next couple days. We'll get the HWRF and the HMON, the HAFS A and B, those high res exclusive hurricane models to start to spit out their solutions on Invest 99L. I can tell you this right now. You can just clearly look at this infrared satellite imagery. Nice blow up of higher cloud tops near that center of circulation. The sea surface temperatures are extremely warm. The ocean heat content is very impressive for November. It's not just high sea surface temperatures at the surface, but there's a quality of that heat content in depth as well. So rich moisture, high sea surface temperatures, and basically very, very little wind shear as well. Initially, of course, it's going to spread some rain to Haiti and portions of Jamaica, but as it gets into the Western Caribbean and stalls and doesn't move much over the weekend, this is the area that more than likely this will quickly develop. And again, potentially even by Friday, we can have ourselves a hurricane in that area in red. This is the visible satellite imagery, or high-res visible satellite imagery here at Meteo Mundo. Again, we lose the visible satellite imagery pretty early in November as we lose the daylight quickly, but you can clearly see just before we get towards the end of that viz, look at those shadows and those bright thunderstorms just beginning to develop, the higher cloud tops. And again, all signs point to rapid intensification as it moves off towards the west. So we're going to break this down in a lot of different ways, okay? First thing I want to look at here, and we're going to look at all the different models available, a ton of things to discuss. I want to talk about some of the big weather features that could influence ultimately where this might go, okay? Then we'll look at the GFS and the European and the ICON models and the different solutions and how those bigger weather features are being interpreted different by each model. So the first thing I'm going to do here is actually show you a product that I very rarely, if I've ever shown you, I look at it a lot behind the scenes, but these are the winds on the GFS model at 850 millibars, okay? because there's a couple of different areas of influence here as to where this might go. Now, the interesting thing is, as the winds load up here on the GFS model, you're going to start to see, when we go back to the beginning, you don't hardly pick up any of those winds until it gets off the coast of Honduras and Nicaragua. Remember, the storm, as it gets stronger, is developing with height in the atmosphere, and so as it gets stronger, we pick up the stronger winds at the different levels of the atmosphere, 850 millibars, 500 millibars, even the 200 millibar level. So you start to see this storm get stronger and stronger. And of course, today is the 12th. So as we get towards the 15th, which is Friday, that's where we could potentially have the hurricane developing. Now, the first feature I want to discuss as to how this could influence the storm is this trough that is digging off of the United States East Coast. You can see the kink here. Now, if you take a look at this, watch how over the weekend, there's actually a slight pull east to the storm. That's the influence of this trough. It's actually trying to drag the storm with it as it moves its way off towards the east. So you notice there's a subtle influence to that trough, and that basically pulls the storm east, and then the trough goes far enough away where the influence relaxes, and that will then allow the storm to begin to head back north and west. If this trough were closer to the storm, it might have had the opportunity to pull this north and east. It would have brought more impacts to Jamaica and Hispaniola, but it would have then gone out to sea. But I don't see this trough being strong enough to do anything more than basically keep this storm sitting right there. And again, on this GFS model, Saturday, Sunday, this is not only a hurricane, but there's the potential that this is already a major hurricane, okay? This is how serious of a situation we could end up getting out of this storm. But once we start to lose the influence, excuse me for a second, those, I think, just decided to pop away here as I put it back into play. Hopefully they'll pick back up. There we go, okay. Once we lose the influence of that trough, it should begin to turn to the north and to the west, okay? And that now takes us to the second major player and how this could ultimately go as far as track goes. And that is going to be an area of high pressure developing right over the state of Florida. If you look at these 850 millibar winds, of course you get clockwise winds around an area of high pressure. This area of high pressure should be building into Florida over the weekend. This is going to be the 17th, which is Sunday, okay? How strong that area of high pressure is and how much it dominates the storm over the weekend will ultimately determine how far north or west the storm goes, all right? Because again, on the south side of this high, you have easterly winds. That's going to try and push the storm west into the Yucatan and portions of Central America, all right? On this GFS model, this high is relatively weak. Beginning on Monday, the 18th, it starts to move into the Western Atlantic, right? And now you start to see the winds here turn out of the south into the east, and that's going to allow the storm to go farther to the north, okay? And so on the GFS, the influence of this upper high over Florida is not as significant, and that's going to pull the storm more due north, okay, rather than taking it directly into the Yucatan and Central America, where the European model wants to try and take this storm, and I'm going to show you that in a second, okay? So when we look at the GFS model here, again, the influence of that high is not as significant. The storm then goes to the north. You have a big digging trough in the southern United States through the southern plains, which will ultimately push the storm off towards the east. Now, both the GFS and the European model ultimately have this storm going into South Florida, but as a much different storm, because the European model has this ridge of high pressure stronger, puts it into the Yucatan and then into Florida as a much weaker storm, where the GFS keeps the center of circulation over water, and you get yourself a much stronger storm. So let's break this down. On the GFS model, right? Rain impacts for Jamaica, certainly rain and wind impacts for the Cayman Islands, portions of central and western Cuba, all right? Not as much impact for the Yucatan and Central America, including Belize and Guatemala. Significant impacts on the GFS would be possible for portions of South Florida, the Florida Keys, and potentially the Northwest Bahamas. And the timing of that would be as we get into next Tuesday and then next Wednesday, the 19th and the 20th, all right? And again, we are looking at the potential of this becoming a major hurricane on the GFS model. That's what the wind profile looks like at 850 millibars on the GFS. Let's take a look at what it looks like as far as reflectivity, right? So more traditional, this is the rain being developed with a storm. First of all, you can clearly see a big old eye developing, all right? This is, again, part of the reason why we have to really keep our guard up with this storm. Now, same model, so you're just gonna see how this plays out as far as reflectivity. The storm gets towards the coastline of Honduras and Nicaragua as we get into Friday. That trough in the Western Atlantic tries to drag the storm with it, so it actually gets pulled slightly off towards the east, but that trough, and again, you notice just a little subtle movement east, but that trough moves away, and now we can start to see the storm pick up what it should want to try and do, and that's move north in latitude, especially this time of the year, and here it goes. On the GFS, this latest run, it slips right across the Yucatan Passage between Yucatan and western Cuba, and then into South Florida as potentially a significant hurricane as we get into next Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday time frame will be dependent. We'll see how that ultimately plays out. But there you go. Again, that trough slows the storm down, but ultimately doesn't pull it with it. And then the GFS has it going up to the north and to the west. So looking at the impacts for the Caribbean, again, as this develops, heavy rain, possible for Jamaica and the Cayman Islands, Nicaragua, Honduras, Guatemala, Belize, portions of the Yucatan, central and western Cuba. Certainly on the east side, we could get some heavier rain into eastern Cuba, portions of Haiti, the Dominican Republic, and the Turks and Caicos, but just some rain there. Look at the consolidation, your area of low pressure really getting stronger here. And again, on the GFS model, by late Friday, the 15th, that's a hurricane, okay? And over the weekend, as it sits off the coastline of Honduras, that's a major hurricane, all right, with winds of over 111 miles an hour. It then starts its track north and to the west and then pulls ultimately to the east. The one thing that's definitely going to happen is that this storm is going to have to go east eventually as it moves north in latitude because of this huge digging trough. But the biggest question will be the influence of that area of high pressure over Florida and just what it might end up doing, okay? Let's take a look at the wind profile here out of the GFS as well. So same model. Let me do it this way. I'm going to show you this. Let me take off the vectors and then loop this up. So this is going to be your surface winds from the GFS model. Might take just a second here to fully load this up, but you're going to start to see quick development. Look how fast this wraps up. Stays offshore. Look how strong it gets. And we'll look at those winds coming up. And then here it comes into southwest Florida as an impactful hurricane. All right. Now, again, still one model run, but I'm going to show you the European as well. And again, there's a reason why we're already taking a fairly serious tone with this storm. All right. Here are your sustained surface winds. These are not gusts. All right. These are sustained surface winds. You've got yourself a major hurricane. This is Sunday afternoon. All right, sustained winds on the GFS of a category 3. Could it be weaker than that? Absolutely. All right, but I'm going to show you that the models are not playing around with what's going to ultimately become Sara and how quickly this could form. Again, this is Tuesday, late in the day. We just have an invest, but by Friday we get a hurricane, and then we get a potential major hurricane by late Saturday, Sunday, moving up to the north and to the west. We hope maybe it weakens a bit if it's going into southwest Florida, if it's going towards the Florida Keys, if it's going to the northwest Bahamas. Obviously, the Bahamas, there will be more impact for the southwest side of Florida. But for the northwest Bahamas here, you would still have very significant impacts. I mean, you would have hurricane force winds trying to get to Freeport, Lucaya, and Grand Bahama, and Walker's Key and Bimini based on this latest run. All right. So on the GFS, serious significant impacts are possible for southern Florida, the Keys, and portions of the northwest Bahamas. High impacts for western Cuba. Could see some higher impacts for the Yucatan, Cayman Islands. A lot of rain for Jamaica, Kingston, and then on over towards Haiti and the southeast sides of Cuba. All right? That's kind of the full suite of the GFS. I told you the European model has a stronger area of high pressure over Florida. Guess what happens in the European model? that pulls the storm into the Yucatan. So it makes landfall near northern Belize or Quintana Roo, and then ultimately does go into South Florida, but as a much weaker storm, because obviously you get the land interaction here. Again, over the weekend, it sits. Look at that trough, try and pull it east, but it loses its influence by Sunday, then allows the storm to turn to the north and to the west, but ultimately because the high is stronger, the westerlies here pull it into the Yucatan, all right? One more time. Slowly developing, but even by Thursday, Friday in the European, you get at least a tropical storm. Here comes the trough off the United States East Coast. It tries to pull Sara with it, can't ultimately do it. So then we'll begin our northwest turn as a hurricane. More influence here for Central America and the Yucatan. Landfall, significant impacts there, and then back into South Florida and into the Bahamas. Weaker, but still could be an intense storm even on the European model. But that's the difference and how strong the models have this high situated over Florida into the weekend and early next week. What this storm does in the Western Caribbean, right? So there you go. Now, for anyone else who lives on the Gulf Coast, Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, wondering could this impact me? The answer is no. Huge digging trough in the southern plains. We get it a lot this time of the year. This is November, guys. Will pull this storm off towards the east. There's really no way that this storm can go north and west with this huge digging trough. It's going to get shoved east. Now, even for the panhandle of Florida and even central Florida, probably not going to be your storm either. More than likely, this is southwest or southern Florida if it takes this route on the GFS, right? I'm not sure how far north in latitude it can go before it has to move off towards the east, all right? Let's look at the ensemble members. We looked at the main deterministic of each of the GFS and the European. Here are the ensemble members. So basically all the perturbations, if you will, of the models. We'll start off with the GFS. Once again, you see a cluster in the Western Caribbean. Some try and kind of sneak it towards, the western side of the Atlantic and the Turks and Caicos, but ultimately most of the GFS has this coming up north and east. Notice that none of them really have this getting into the Yucatan. So the GFS overall is just much weaker with the area of high pressure in Florida, and its influence is less on the storm, and that storm ultimately goes farther to the north and to the east, rather than taking a westerly turn. On the European ensembles, you'll again see a storm developing in a hurry. Look at that, Friday into Saturday, there's your influence, the trough pulling the storm initially east and then back to the north and to the west. Could it get closer to Jamaica and the Cayman Islands, even as a hurricane? It's plausible. I don't want to just completely say that there's going to be no impacts for Jamaica or the Cayman Islands, especially the Cayman Islands. Being a little bit farther north and west than Jamaica is something I'll closely monitor. A little bit more concerned about obviously this push here. But again, ultimately, by the wee hours of Thursday morning, the European model is where the GFS is into South Florida and the Northwest Bahamas, but just a completely different route through the Yucatan, okay? So let's break this down. The GFS model has the weaker high over Florida. That equals a more north track and a stronger storm because it doesn't make landfall over the Yucatan. So that means higher impacts for Florida and the Bahamas, with still potential significant impacts for portions of Cuba, the Cayman Islands, and maybe even Jamaica. Now, the European model has that stronger high over Florida, so it's more of a west track. That means higher impacts for the Yucatan, maybe even the northern sides of Central America, including Belize. Ultimately, it goes into Florida and the Bahamas, but as a weaker storm, okay? Now look, friends, there's always an escape hatch. There's always a way that these main global models aren't picking up on the correct solutions to these weather influences that I just showed you, okay? I give you the ICON model. The ICON model has an extremely strong area of high pressure over Florida. Look what it does to the storm. After the trough moves, and it slows down just like the others, as we get into Monday, Tuesday, it buries the storm into the Yucatan and never tries to have it fully develop. That's it right there, but as an extremely weak, shallow storm that wouldn't have any influence to the northern Gulf Coast. Now look, I want to be clear, this would still be a significant storm for Honduras and Guatemala and Belize and Yucatan, but if it goes that far west and really gets buried into Mexico, there is an opportunity that never fully forms again once it gets into the Gulf of Mexico, all right? So again, the ICON is right with the GFS and the European as that trough tries to tug it, but it never does. but it's much farther west thanks to this area of high pressure ultimately being stronger. One more time, here comes the trough. The storm just basically sits off the Honduras coastline. Once the trough moves away, it progresses not north, but because this high is stronger and the winds are stronger out of the east, it pulls it deeper into the Yucatan and never ultimately develops. Obviously, there's still some solution differences in the models, but I wanted to bring you everything that I saw behind the scenes for today. I think there's a fair amount of clarity here in the Caribbean for right now, but ultimately how this plays out down the road, that's why we're going to be monitoring this for you guys day by day. Friends, if you've gotten anything out of this video so far, I really appreciate you taking a quick second, hitting the like button. If you haven't subscribed to Meteo Mundo, you like what you've seen, you want these daily forecasts, you want these tropical updates, please click the subscribe button right now. We're on our way to 50,000 subscribers. I would love to get there in a hurry. I say we need to continue to build this channel to have it grow, and I'm very serious, because if that doesn't happen, much like the NSYNC song that has become popular again, it ain't no lie, we will be bye, bye, bye. But I hope that's not the case. We want to continue to provide you these updates here daily at Meteo Mundo. Okay, so now we're going to get into the rest of what's happening across our area. Obviously, you know I'm going to be keeping an extremely close eye on this storm. If, for some reason, you have a question about what I just talked about, drop it in the comments section below. I'm sure we're going to get a lot of questions about Rusty. I'm traveling to this area, the Yucatan, the Bahamas, Jamaica here or there. Should I cancel? Whatever. I never give specific vacation advice because everyone has different weather tolerances and plans. I hope that the information that I've laid out to you though in this video is a good starting point for you to make an informed decision. All right, things can and will change with this storm, but this is the starting point as of this Tuesday, and we'll go from there. Now look, this has brought some rain. We've got some showers building into Jamaica as we speak. And there'll be a few lightning strikes, and some of this rain will just continue to develop in Jamaica through the remainder of this late Tuesday. So there could be some overnight rain for Kingston and Montego Bay and Negril. So keep that in mind as well. We've had some showers over Haiti for today with this. We've also had some active weather in the Dominican Republic as this tropical wave, which is now Invest 99L, has moved off towards the west. We still have some scattered showers and a few rumbles of thunder. Jules Clifford sent me this video in. This is from the Los Corrales, Bávaro area of Punta Cana there in the Dominican Republic on the far east side. Look at the flooding there on the roadways, okay? Now, you always be very careful if you're driving through flooded roads. This looks to be relatively tame. Jules shooting this video, but you can see that guy walking. There's some little bit of movement to some of that rain as well. So meaning that, you know, this water is covering the roadway and there's a little bit of speed to that. But I appreciate Jules sitting in that video, shows you some of the localized flash flooding that we've had as the tropical wave has progressed through the Caribbean. It's been more scattered than anything across eastern Dominican Republic so far today. There's Punta Cana. We've had a few showers develop towards the Samana Peninsula, even back down towards La Romana. Same situation for our friends in the U.S. and British Virgin Islands in Puerto Rico. Showers and storms at the hour on the far western side of the island. Aguadilla on over towards the Mayaguez area. Again, even a few lightning strikes here. Let's bring the lightning counter back on. Oh, hit the wrong button. There we go. So you can just see a few lightning strikes associated with that. Now, of course, it's not going to loop. Now it's going to loop. Couple of lightning strikes, one or two, nothing much. Same situation here in the U.S. and British Virgin Islands. As the tropical wave, which is now Invest 99L, has moved west, the influence has begun to relax. So no flood watches or warnings in effect for any of these areas anymore, but this is what's been left behind. St. Thomas, U.S. Virgin Islands. Appreciate Jen sending in this photo from Sonia. And you can see the landslide that was produced on this roadway in the St. Thomas area of the U.S. Virgin Islands. You get the heavy rain. Obviously, you have some terrain there in St. Thomas. And look at the landslide coming down on the roadway. So again, significant rain. You got to have some really heavy rainfall in a short amount of time to produce this kind of landslide action. Appreciate Jen sending in that photo. Again, I appreciate you guys sending in these photos. It really does help tell the story. Now we'll continue to see scattered showers through the Lesser Antilles. We did have some heavier rain today in Trinidad, where they did have a green alert for some heavy rainfall. That has now been allowed to be discontinued, but earlier in the day, portions of Grenada, the southern sides of the Grenadines, Tobago and Trinidad, some areas, but especially down towards Trinidad, had some heavier rain. You live in this area, let me know some of the rainfall that you guys have been seeing. Scattered showers towards Nueva Esparta, scattered rain for portions of the ABC Islands as well, especially towards Aruba, but Bonaire and Curacao, all with the opportunity. Some of our friends here in the ABC Islands have been dropping in the comments section below that you guys have had some healthy rain the last couple of days, and that's great to hear. One of the areas that actually could desperately use this rain, scattered rain for Panama and Costa Rica, and again, it's been drier lately in the Yucatan and portions of Central America, but obviously as what ultimately will become Sara begins to evolve, we're going to get some heftier rain in these areas, and it's been quieter but still windy for our friends in the Bahamas and the Turks and Caicos for today. Let's take a look at the model. Again, we don't need to go out as far as we did, so I'm just going to go out the next couple of days here, guys. We'll go out just 3 days. I think that's a good idea. So again, if you're not going to be directly influenced by what is ultimately going to become Sara, let's take a look at your forecast. We'll start in the Lesser Antilles. Rain chances, sorry about that. Rain chances will continue to drop a bit. There's nothing that's going to be concentrated from Anguilla to Antigua and Barbuda, St. Kitts and Nevis, and off towards the south. So scattered rain in these areas. Still could be pockets of heavier downpours. Still can't rule out 1 to 2 inches or 25 to 50 millimeters on a daily basis, but we're just not going to have a huge slug of moisture coming in. So Montserrat and Guadeloupe and Dominica off towards the south, Martinique, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, our friends in Barbados, T&T, Nueva Esparta, again, pockets of rain here and there, but ultimately you're drying out a bit. It's going to be the same situation for the U.S. and British Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico as well. Still could see some decent rain tomorrow, and then more than likely the rain chances will fall a bit. Now, there's a couple of scenarios where the rain could still be a little bit higher. This trough that I mentioned could try and pull a little bit of moisture south with it. You can see that line developing, and then if for some reason what ultimately becomes Sara back builds far enough, some of that moisture could get tugged far enough east. But ultimately, I think that the farthest east the moisture goes is the Dominican Republic, but especially the Haiti side of Hispaniola, eastern sides of Cuba, and then certainly places like Jamaica, okay? Starting again Thursday, Friday, the 14th Thursday, the 15th Friday, it's going to start to get wet again for Jamaica. So get prepared for more heavy rainfall. We'll talk about the winds. Ultimately, we could have some squalls coming into Jamaica and the Cayman Islands as well. But hopefully we keep the core winds of what will be Sara a little bit farther off towards the west. There's going to be some influence here, obviously, along the Honduras coastline. If you live in Roatan or Guanaja or other areas of coastal Belize, you know I'll be monitoring the situation for you, but look for the wind and the rain and the seas to be picking up beginning late Thursday, but especially Friday and into the weekend. And then ultimately, of course, the other areas that I've already mentioned. Speaking of the surf and sea conditions, as that trough comes off the United States East Coast, we've already mentioned the near gale conditions it could be bringing. Bermuda would be included in that. Here it comes. Look at those winds. Obviously, we're going to be churned up in a significant way as Sara continues to build, especially if it becomes even a high-end Cat 1 or Cat 2, but especially if it becomes a major hurricane. Obviously, you're looking at some significant seas that will go along with this in the central western sides of the Caribbean and potentially, of course, through portions of the Gulf of Mexico. You can see what that trough does, by the way, in the southern side of the U.S., the southern plains. It's going to push a wall of wind into the Gulf of Mexico as well, which is why this storm has to go east ultimately, but that's going to kick up the sea conditions through the Gulf as well. Rainfall totals, most impacts will follow as Sara develops. Again, anywhere from Haiti, Cuba, Jamaica, the Cayman Islands, depending on how this goes. Remember, on the European model, it's farther west, so more rain impacts for Central America, especially Honduras north into the Yucatan. Not as much rain, at least through Tuesday. Again, we're not to landfall yet in 7 days, South Florida, the Bahamas, so relatively dry in these areas. A little bit drier through most of the Lesser Antilles, still some pockets of rain in the Windward Islands, and then portions of the Virgin Islands and Puerto Rico. Again, scattered showers there. This is what the rainfall totals look like on the GFS model. Let me get rid of that area of development so it's just a little bit easier to see. And then also, I'm going to take this out a little bit farther in time. Let's go out to the 20th, which would be next Wednesday. And you can see ultimately what this storm does. Now, I want to be clear. Look at the potential heavier rain the GFS model brings to Jamaica. This could be significant potential flooding. I'm not ready, by the way, to be clear, to talk about any specific impact for any one area. We're not there yet, okay? We might get there soon because we might end up having a tropical storm by Thursday and a hurricane Friday, but I'm not there yet. But you can clearly see on the GFS, high rainfall is possible for Jamaica. High rainfall is possible for the Cayman Islands as well. We'll see. It wouldn't be as much rain for Belize. I mean, you're still talking about several inches. The northeast coastline of Honduras and down towards Nicaragua could be significantly impacted. It's unbelievable on the GFS, by the way, how this storm just threads the needle, right? You know, oh, just 9 inches of rain, 50 miles offshore, but Cancun gets 2 or 3. It would be crazy. But then you can clearly see where the GFS wants to ultimately pull the storm, and that would be back into the Fort Myers area of Florida, and that would be as we get into next Wednesday, all right? And then, as I've mentioned, relatively dry for the Bahamas until the influence of Sara could ultimately come there. There's your kind of elongated east to west area of rain that could influence portions of Cuba, the Turks, the Caicos, portions of the Greater Antilles. And again, a little bit farther south that you go in the GFS, a little bit more rain back down towards the Windward Islands. Friends, I appreciate you guys. Hope you're doing well. Hope you got something out of this video. Thank you for following us across all social media, Instagram, TikTok, X, Facebook. You want to send me a picture or video like Jules and Jen did today, it's myMediaMundo@gmail.com. That's the easiest way to do that. As I've stated, if you have a specific question about the forecast, feel free to drop it in the comments section below. And please, while you're down there, thank you for liking and subscribing. Friends, have a great rest of your Tuesday. You know I'm back tomorrow with all the latest information on Sara and the rest of your forecasts across the Caribbean and the Bahamas. Until then, you take care. I'll see you soon right here at Meteo Mundo.